It wasn't supposed to be like this. There are moments in life when you think you know everything, when you feel so sure of the path you're walking that nothing could possibly shake you. But then, one small thing happens, one moment, and everything changes. You start questioning everything you've ever believed in, everything you thought you knew. That night, everything fell apart. But I didn't see it coming. At least, not until it was too late. I was sitting at the table, my fork halfway to my mouth, when she said it. It wasn't something loud or dramatic. In fact, it was almost casual, like she had no idea the weight of the words she was about to throw at me. "You look ridiculous," she said, her voice cutting through the noise of the restaurant. I didn't react right away. I thought maybe I had misheard her. Maybe it was just the hum of the crowd around us, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of other conversations, but no. She was looking right at me. The words hung in the air like a bad joke, waiting to land. And then she repeated it. "Don't touch me. You look ridiculous." I felt my face flush. My hand, which had been reaching for my wine, froze mid-air. My stomach tightened. It wasn't anger, not really. It was more like the air had been sucked out of the room, and I was the one who couldn't breathe. I stared at her, trying to understand what just happened. She wasn't angry, wasn't upset. No, this was something else. This was dismissive. It was cold. It was like she had completely given up on me. You see, we didn't have a perfect relationship. Nobody does, but we had a routine, a rhythm. It was always a little rough around the edges, but it worked. I worked hard. She worked hard. We had our struggles, sure, but this was different. I hadn't seen this coming, and I was struggling to process it. For a split second, I thought maybe she was joking. Maybe it was just a bad joke. Maybe I was overreacting. But the look on her face said otherwise. She was serious, and I wasn't prepared for that. I had always thought that I could deal with anything, that no matter how bad things got, I could power through. I was used to the small insults, the little digs. I had learned to smile and let them roll off. But this was different. And as I sat there, staring at the woman I'd shared so many years with, I realized something that hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been fooling myself. I had been living in a world where I thought I could fix things, where I could make her happy by doing all the right things, paying attention to her, doing the dishes, being there when she needed me. But it was never enough. I could never do enough. I wasn't the one she wanted. And in that moment, I felt it, the crushing weight of rejection. It wasn't just the words she had said. It wasn't just the look on her face. It was the realization that, somehow, I wasn't enough for her anymore. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to shout, to ask her what was going on, to demand an explanation. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. The words got stuck in my throat. I looked at her, waiting for her to say something that would make it all okay, waiting for her to take it back. But she didn't. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to make it right. And that's when it hit me. She had already checked out. She had already decided I wasn't worth it. I stood up. It wasn't even a choice. It was like my body had made the decision for me. I didn't think. I just stood up and looked down at her. "You're not worth it," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I saw the flicker of shock in her eyes. Maybe she wasn't expecting that. Maybe she thought I'd beg or apologize or try to fix it. But I wasn't going to do that. Not this time. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't care what she thought. That was the first time in years I had done something for myself. And I knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't realize it then, but that would be the night that changed everything. I don't think I ever fully realized how much I had been holding on to. You know, we all have those little things that we believe make us who we are, our identity, our purpose. For the longest time, I thought mine was being the perfect husband, the guy who always did the right thing. I cooked dinner when she didn't have time. I cleaned up the messes. I kept the house running, even when it felt like she didn't care. But that night, I was left with nothing but the realization that I had been living a lie. When I left that restaurant, I didn't know where I was going. My feet just carried me down the street, and for the first time in years, I was truly alone with my thoughts. The streets seemed so much quieter than usual. Maybe it was just me, or maybe it was the weight of everything that had just happened. As I walked, I couldn't help but replay the scene over and over in my head. "You look ridiculous." It echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain. I had tried to hold on to something, to fix something that wasn't broken in the first place. Or maybe it had been, and I just didn't see it. I was too blind to the cracks forming between us. I didn't even know how to react when she said it. I could feel the anger building up in me, but it didn't feel right to yell, to make a scene. It was almost like I had already accepted that whatever we had was gone. So I did what I always do, shut down. I turned off all the emotions, shut down the hurt, and just walked away. The walk was long. The city lights blurred together as I tried to focus on anything other than the fact that the woman I thought I knew had just crushed everything inside me. It wasn't just her words. It was the fact that I had spent so much time trying to fix something that had already fallen apart. She didn't care. She didn't even see me. When I got back home, the house felt empty. I walked in through the front door, hearing the soft click of it closing behind me, and I just stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. I wanted to scream, to break something, to punch the walls, but I didn't. The silence was deafening. She wasn't home. Of course, she wasn't. I didn't expect her to be. After all, why would she be? I hadn't heard from her after I left, and at that point, I didn't know if I wanted to hear from her. I didn't know what I would say, what I could say. So I sat down on the couch, the same couch we'd spent countless evenings on together, laughing, talking, living. And for the first time, it felt alien. I tried to put my thoughts in order, but nothing made sense. You're not worth it. It kept repeating in my head, and I realized that I hadn't been worth it for a long time. That's what hit me hardest, that I was just another thing to be dismissed. It wasn't the first time she'd made me feel small, but it was the first time it felt like the end. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I looked at the clock, hours had passed. It was getting late, and she still wasn't home. I couldn't even bring myself to check my phone for messages. I didn't want to know. I was used to her coming home late. I was used to the silence. But that night, I wanted something different. I wanted her to walk through the door and apologize. I wanted her to come home and feel sorry for what she'd said, for the way she treated me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that was never going to happen. She didn't see me anymore. I wasn't even a person to her. I was a placeholder, a convenient option when it suited her. That's when it hit me. I had been in this relationship for so long. I had convinced myself that I was doing everything right. I was the good husband, always doing the right thing, never complaining, always supporting. But where had that gotten me? I was broken, and she didn't even care. The anger started to build again. But this time, it wasn't directed at her. It was directed at myself. How had I let it go on for so long? How had I allowed myself to become invisible in my own marriage? It was a wake-up call, though. I realized I had to make a decision. I wasn't going to keep begging for her attention, for her affection, for her love. If she couldn't see me for who I was, then maybe it was time I saw myself for who I was, someone who deserved more. The night was getting later, and she still wasn't home. I didn't know where she was, but I didn't care. At that moment, I made a decision. I was done. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I wasn't going to let her keep walking all over me. I wasn't going to keep waiting for a woman who had already checked out. I grabbed my phone and started typing, the words coming faster than I could think. I'm done. I deserve better. I stared at the screen for a moment, then hit send. And just like that, everything changed. I don't think anyone truly prepares themselves for the moment when they realize they're no longer a priority in someone else's life. It's subtle at first, like the slow fade of a song playing in the background, so quiet that you think you can still hear it even when it's long gone. You tell yourself it's nothing, just a rough patch, a temporary distance, or maybe just a bad day. But then it builds. One moment leads to another, and before you know it, you're standing in the ruins of what you thought was something solid. That night, after I sent the message, I expected something, anything, really. Maybe a response, a call, even a text, anything that would indicate that she felt the weight of what I had just done. But there was nothing. The phone sat there, glowing in the dim light of the living room, mocking me with its silence. I kept telling myself that it was fine, that I had made the right choice. But the longer I waited, the more I realized how empty my words had sounded. I had told her I was done, but was I really? The truth was, I was scared. Scared of the future, scared of the unknown. I had been living in this bubble of self-deception for so long, telling myself I was doing all the right things, that the love would come back, that things would improve if I just kept giving. But now that I had finally taken the step to put myself first, I was left standing in the dark, unsure of who I was without her by my side. I paced the apartment, trying to gather my thoughts. I tried to distract myself, but everything around me felt like a reminder of the life I had built with Emma. The photos on the walls, the couch where we'd spent so many late nights watching movies, the kitchen table where we'd shared meals. All of it was empty now, hollow, like the shell of something that once mattered but had long since decayed. Eventually, I gave up trying to distract myself. I sat down on the couch and picked up the phone again, staring at the screen. I was waiting for the call that would bring everything back into focus, for the apology I was hoping would somehow make everything better. But deep down, I knew I wasn't going to get it. It was then that I realized something crucial. She wasn't going to change. No apology was going to fix what had been broken for so long. I had been waiting for her to come to her senses, to recognize all the things I had done for her, to realize that I had been there, always there, while she had been slipping away. But she hadn't, and I was tired of waiting. I spent the rest of the night thinking about my next move. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand some kind of explanation for what had happened to us. But another part of me knew it wouldn't matter. It would be just another argument, another fight where I would be the one trying to fix everything. I didn't want to fight anymore. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to show up, to tell me how sorry she was, to try and piece together the wreckage of what we once had. I was done waiting for a love that was never really there. When she finally came home later that day, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some big confrontation or emotional meltdown. She walked in like it was any other day. She was tired, like she always was, and maybe a little surprised by the emptiness of the house. But she didn't seem to care. She dropped her keys on the counter and walked into the living room, where I was sitting, still holding my phone, still waiting for something to happen. I stood up when she entered, and for the first time in a long while, I looked her in the eye. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. "I don't know what this is anymore, but I can't keep pretending everything's fine." She blinked at me, the shock on her face momentarily flickering. I could tell she didn't know how to respond, and I wasn't going to give her the chance. I had spent too many years letting her control the narrative. But not anymore. I've been doing everything I can to hold this together. But I'm not doing it anymore, I continued. I'm done pretending. She opened her mouth, probably to say something, to protest, but I cut her off. "You don't get to talk. You've had your chance." I could see the change in her eyes. Anger, disbelief, maybe a little fear. But it was too late. There was nothing she could say to fix it. Nothing she could do to undo the years I had spent trying to make something out of nothing. She had taken me for granted for far too long. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange calm wash over me. It was the first time in a long while that I felt in control, that I wasn't at the mercy of her moods, her silence, or her coldness. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm done here." And just like that, I walked out. The door closed behind me with a finality that I could feel deep in my chest. The weight of the silence that followed was deafening, but for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. I had made my choice. The silence after I walked out of that house was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't peaceful or freeing like I thought it would be. It was suffocating, like the air had thickened around me, making it hard to breathe. The weight of my decision hit me like a tidal wave, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure what came next. I had always been the one holding everything together. I had always been the rock, the one who never wavered, the one who kept things running smoothly no matter how broken I felt inside. But now, I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't control. I had walked away from a relationship that had consumed me, a marriage that, in the end, wasn't even worth fighting for. And I didn't know if I was strong enough to handle it. I found myself wandering the streets, not knowing where I was going or what I was doing. I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't have a plan. I just walked, my feet carrying me further from everything I thought I knew. The city was buzzing around me, people rushing in every direction, but I felt like I was in a bubble, disconnected from the world. At some point, I ended up at the park, the same park where Emma and I had spent a lazy Sunday afternoon a few years ago. It was strange how certain places had the power to trigger memories. The swings creaked in the breeze, the sound of children laughing in the distance filled the air, and for a brief moment, I was taken back to a time when everything was simpler, when I thought we had forever. But that version of me, the one who believed in the future, the one who thought everything would work out, was long gone. I sat on the bench, my head in my hands, trying to wrap my mind around what had happened. "I'm done," Those words kept echoing in my mind, like a broken record, reminding me that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I had taken the first step in letting go, but the question was, could I really let go? Could I really walk away from everything I had built with Emma? I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't allow myself to keep making excuses for her, for the way she treated me. I couldn't keep waiting for a woman who didn't want to be with me, who couldn't see what I had been trying to offer her. She was too far gone, and I had to face the truth. She would never be the person I needed her to be. When I finally pulled myself together enough to leave the park, I found myself standing in front of a bar. It wasn't the kind of place I usually went to, but for some reason, I felt drawn to it. Maybe I was looking for a distraction, a way to forget for just a little while what I had done, what had been done to me. I walked in, ordered a drink, and sat at the bar, my mind still racing. The bartender was a guy named Jake. He looked like he'd seen his fair share of broken hearts, and I'm sure mine was nothing new to him. He poured me a drink without asking questions, and we exchanged a few polite words. But then, he leaned in closer, as if he knew exactly what I needed to hear. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. It was such a simple question, but it stopped me in my tracks. Was I okay? I wanted to lie, to say everything was fine, that I was just having a bad day, that this was nothing. But I couldn't. I couldn't lie anymore. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "I'm not okay." Jake nodded, like he understood, and there was a strange comfort in that. He didn't push me to talk. He didn't ask for the details. He just let me sit there, quietly nursing my drink, trying to sort through the chaos in my mind. It felt good, in a way, to be around someone who didn't expect anything from me, someone who wasn't part of my past, someone who didn't know the lies and the years of pretending. For a brief moment, I wasn't the broken husband, the guy who had been tossed aside. I was just another person trying to figure things out. But that comfort was fleeting. As the night wore on, my mind wandered back to Emma. I couldn't escape her, no matter how hard I tried. What was she doing right now? Was she sitting at home, wondering where I was? Or was she already moving on, already forgetting me the way I had feared for so long? I took another sip of my drink, the bitterness of the alcohol mixing with the bitterness in my chest. I couldn't stop myself from thinking about her, from wondering if she was out there, with someone else, living the life that I had thought we would build together. The jealousy crept in, cold and sharp, and I hated myself for feeling it. But I had to face it. I had to face the fact that Emma wasn't coming back. That life as I knew it was gone. I left the bar in a daze, my head spinning. The streets were quieter now, the city lights casting long shadows across the pavement. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. But in that loneliness, something shifted. I realized that maybe, just maybe, I didn't need her. Maybe I didn't need anyone. For the first time in years, I was standing on my own 2 feet, facing the unknown, and it didn't feel as terrifying as I thought it would. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something I had been waiting for without even realizing it. The next few days were a blur. I stayed at a friend's place for a while, Sam's place, to be specific. He was the kind of guy who always knew how to distract me, even when I didn't want to be distracted. But this time, I wasn't looking for distractions. I wasn't looking for anything except a way to escape the crushing weight of my own thoughts. It was a weird feeling, waking up in someone else's bed, surrounded by someone else's things. For a while, I thought about going back to the apartment. I thought about showing up at the door just to see her face when I walked in. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to confront the wreckage of everything I had tried to hold together for so long. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her smile that used to light up the room, her eyes that once held so much warmth, but now were cold and distant. It wasn't just the words she had said to me that night, but the way she said them. There was no remorse, no apology, just a cold dismissal. I hadn't realized how far apart we had grown until that moment, how far apart she had grown. I spent hours just thinking about us, about the relationship we used to have. I tried to remember the good times, the moments that had made me fall in love with her in the first place. But it was hard. It was hard to hold on to those memories when everything felt so broken, when everything felt so distant. Sam tried to talk to me a few times. He would sit with me, cracking open a beer and asking me how I was doing. And every time, I would tell him the same thing. I'm fine. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. I wasn't fine, and I wasn't going to be fine until I figured out how to make peace with what had happened. But peace didn't come right away. It wasn't until a few days later, when I was sitting on the couch in Sam's living room, scrolling through old pictures on my phone, that I realized something. I realized that I was never going to get the closure I wanted. I was never going to get the "I'm sorry" I was waiting for, and I was never going to hear her tell me that she had made a mistake. And you know what? That was okay. Because the truth was, I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her to make things right. I needed to make things right for myself. I didn't have to keep living in the shadows of our past, wondering what went wrong, waiting for answers that would never come. It was time for me to step into the light, to take control of my own life, my own future. I didn't need to beg for her to see me. I didn't need to fight for her affection, for her love, for her approval. She had made her choice. And now, I was making mine. It was a hard pill to swallow, but I knew it was the truth. I had been living in her world for so long, adjusting my actions to fit her needs, her expectations, her moods. But now, it was time for me to take back control of my life. I wasn't going to be the person I used to be, the man who let her walk all over him, who begged for scraps of affection and attention. I was done with that. So, I made a decision. I was going to leave. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew it had to be away from her, away from everything that had kept me trapped. I didn't know her an explanation. I didn't know anyone an explanation. I wasn't running away. I was running towards something. Something better. Something for me. It wasn't easy. I'll admit that. The moment I packed my bag and walked out of Sam's place, the weight of the decision hit me again. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing. It had to be better than the life I had been living. I drove for hours, the road stretching out before me, a symbol of all the possibilities that awaited me. The road was uncertain, but it was mine. It was the first time in a long time that I felt free. Not just from Emma, but from myself, from the person I had become. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in a long while, I didn't need to know. I didn't need to have all the answers. I just needed to go. And so I did. I drove until the sun began to set, until the world around me felt like it was opening up. I stopped at a small diner on the side of the road, where I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the cars pass by. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the past on my shoulders. I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder, waiting for someone to catch up to me, to tell me that I had made a mistake. I was doing this for myself, for the first time in years. I sat there, sipping my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through me. The quiet peace of being alone with my thoughts felt comforting. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone, didn't have to answer to anyone. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I was okay with that. I was finally starting to feel like myself again. And that was enough. I spent the next few weeks in limbo. The decision to walk away from Emma had been made, but the aftermath, the weight of what came next, was like trying to carry a burden too heavy to hold. I kept driving. I kept moving, but I still felt stuck. There were days when I didn't know who I was anymore, where I had just been in a relationship with someone for so long that I had lost sight of myself, of what I wanted, what I needed. But slowly, bit by bit, I started to feel the first sparks of something new. A little flicker of hope. It wasn't much at first, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't completely lost. The road had its way of reminding you that time keeps moving forward, whether you want it to or not. I still didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I hadn't planned for any of this. I didn't have some grand plan to find myself, or whatever people say when they leave a relationship. I just knew I couldn't stay in the same place anymore. I couldn't stay in a life where I wasn't seen, where I wasn't appreciated, where the only thing I was good for was filling a space next to someone who had stopped loving me a long time ago. I ended up in a small town. It wasn't much, just a sleepy place where everyone knew everyone's name. A little hole-in-the-wall town that seemed to slow down time. I rented a small apartment above a bookstore, a place that felt strangely comforting. The creaky wooden floors, the smell of old paper, the quiet rhythm of life in this tiny town. It was like stepping into a different world. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I could breathe. The first few days in the apartment were disorienting. I had never lived alone before, not really. There had always been someone else. Always Emma. But now, I was responsible for everything. The dishes, the laundry, the grocery shopping. Hell, even keeping the plants alive. It was strange, but not in a bad way. It was like I had to learn how to take care of myself all over again. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Emma was thinking about me at all, if she even missed me. I wondered if she was out there with someone else, carrying on with her life, as if I had never existed. The jealousy still crept in sometimes, that nagging, unwanted feeling. I didn't know what was worse, the feeling of being replaced or the thought that she had been so cold to me, not even caring to fight for what we had. But I tried not to focus on that. I had made my choice. I couldn't keep torturing myself with what could have been, with the life we might have built together. I wasn't sure I even wanted that life anymore. Not the way it had been, anyway. I spent my days wandering the town. The bookstore below my apartment became my refuge. It was an old, run-down place, stacked with books in every corner, the air thick with the scent of dust and adventure. The owner, a quirky woman named Ruth, was kind enough to let me help out around the shop in exchange for rent. She didn't ask questions about my past, and I didn't offer any explanations. We spent hours talking about books, life, and everything in between. For the first time in a long time, I was present, not weighed down by the ghost of what had been, not haunted by all the unfinished business I'd left behind. It was in that bookstore that I met Sarah. She was a regular at the shop, a quiet woman with a sharp wit and a passion for novels I had never heard of before. She was a bit older than me, but there was something about her presence that was calming. She didn't make me feel like I had to be anything but myself. I started to look forward to her visits. We would talk for hours, sometimes about books, sometimes about life. She never pried into my personal life, and I never volunteered the details. But with every conversation, I felt a little more like myself, like I was finally peeling away the layers of who I had become in my marriage to Emma. One evening, after the shop had closed, Sarah and I sat on the porch of the bookstore, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It had become a routine, her stopping by, and the two of us sharing a quiet moment, just talking. It wasn't anything serious, nothing like what I'd had with Emma, but there was something about Sarah that felt different. She made me laugh. She made me feel, noticed, in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. "You ever think about going back?" she asked one evening, her voice soft as we watched the stars begin to twinkle above. I froze, my mind flashing to Emma, to the life I had walked away from. I had spent so much time convincing myself that leaving was the right choice, that going back wasn't an option, but Sarah's question hit me like a punch to the gut. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't think I could. I don't think I want to." She didn't say anything for a moment, just nodded slowly, her eyes focused on the horizon. I could feel the weight of her gaze, the unspoken understanding between us. She didn't need to push for more. She knew, just like I did, that sometimes you had to leave things behind in order to move forward. "I think you're right," she finally said. "Sometimes, the hardest part isn't leaving. It's figuring out how to rebuild when you have nothing left." Her words stayed with me long after she left. It was like she had given voice to everything I had been feeling but didn't know how to say. Rebuilding. It sounded so simple, yet so impossible. I had spent so long focused on the past, on what I had lost, that I had forgotten how to start fresh, how to rebuild from nothing. But maybe, just maybe, that was what I needed. Not to fix things with Emma, not to go back to the way things were, but to build something new, something just for me. And in that quiet town, in the bookstore where I had found a new rhythm to life, I realized something. I wasn't starting over. I was finally starting again. The weeks seemed to stretch into months as I adjusted to this strange new rhythm of life. I wasn't rushing anymore, not in the same way I had been. There was a certain calm that came with accepting where I was, with learning to let go of the past and start something completely different. But even with this peace, there was always a part of me that couldn't shake the ghost of Emma. I hadn't spoken to her since that night. Not once. I didn't know if she had been trying to reach out. I hadn't checked my phone, hadn't looked at the messages I was sure she had sent. And part of me, the part that was still clinging to old habits, wanted to know. But the other part, the part that had walked away, the part that had made peace with the decision, knew I couldn't look back. Yet there were days, quiet days, when the sun would hang low in the sky and the bookstore would empty of customers, when I would catch myself wondering what she was doing. Was she happy? Was she okay? And in a way that still bothered me, I realized that I still cared. But I couldn't let myself go down that road again. I knew that. I couldn't allow myself to fall into the trap of wondering if things could have turned out differently. The truth was that things had turned out the way they were supposed to. And I was finally starting to understand that. Sarah, the woman from the bookstore, had become a fixture in my life. We spent more time together, often long afternoons where we would talk, sometimes about nothing at all, and other times about everything. I never once expected her to fill the void that Emma had left, but in a way, she did. Not by being a replacement, but by offering me a kind of companionship that was real, untainted by the baggage of a broken marriage. I found myself smiling again, laughing even. It had been so long since I had truly laughed, and it was a strange, almost disorienting feeling. Sarah had this ability to make everything feel easy. There was no pressure, no expectations. She didn't push me to talk about my past, but when I did, she listened. And when I didn't, she didn't question it. She let me be. One evening, about a month after I had left the apartment, Sarah and I sat in the small garden behind the bookstore. The sky was painted in the kind of soft pinks and oranges you only see in summer, and the world felt peaceful, like the calm before a storm that never came. The world, for once, seemed steady. "You know," she said, looking over at me with a soft smile, "I've always wondered what it would be like to just leave everything behind and start over. To not have the past weighing you down." I looked at her, unsure if she was speaking from personal experience or if she just meant it in a general sense. I had a feeling it was a little of both. "I think about it every day," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I've spent so much of my life trying to hold on to things that weren't meant to stay. People, memories, expectations. And now, I feel like I'm finally free." She didn't say anything right away. She just looked at me, her eyes thoughtful, as though she were taking in the full weight of what I'd just said. There was no judgment in her gaze, only understanding, which made me feel lighter than I had in a long time. "That's brave," she said finally, almost in awe. "Most people wouldn't have the guts to walk away from everything they thought they knew." "Maybe," I replied. "But what I've learned is that sometimes the hardest thing to do is let go." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I hadn't realized how much I needed this quiet, this space to breathe, to just be. Later that night, after Sarah left, I sat on the porch of the bookstore alone, the stars slowly emerging in the sky above. The small, simple life I was building here in this town felt like a world away from the chaos I had left behind. And for the first time since I had walked out of that apartment, I wasn't consumed by guilt, by regret, by wondering if I had made the right choice. I knew I had. I had chosen peace. I had chosen myself. But there was still this tiny voice inside me, something I couldn't quite silence, telling me that I wasn't done yet, that something more was waiting for me out there, something I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't shake the feeling that the journey I had started when I walked away from Emma wasn't over. Maybe it was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of clarity. I realized that I was no longer living for the past. I wasn't clinging to old regrets, to old hurts, to a version of myself that no longer existed. I was living for the future, for whatever was next. And for the first time in a long time, I felt excited by the uncertainty of it all. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Emma, not of myself, not of the unknown. I was ready, ready for whatever came next, ready to finally move forward. As the days turned into weeks, the weight that had once anchored me to the past slowly lifted. It wasn't instantaneous, but it was real. I woke up each morning with a sense of purpose, a small spark that hadn't been there for years. The town, with its slow rhythm, had become my refuge. The bookstore was more than just a place to work. It had become my sanctuary. I found comfort in its walls, in the quiet routine of books and coffee and conversations with Sarah. The more I embraced this new life, the more I realized that I hadn't just left Emma behind. I had left behind the person I used to be, the one who thought he had to fix everything, the one who thought love was about sacrifice and never asking for anything in return. And as I let go of those old beliefs, I found something unexpected: peace. Sarah and I grew closer, but not in the way I had once known. There was no rush, no pressure. It wasn't about filling the emptiness left by a failed marriage. It was about something more organic. Two people getting to know each other for who they were in the present, not who they were in the past. We spent long evenings talking, sometimes about nothing at all, other times about things we'd never said to anyone else. And through it all, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't ready to move on because I needed to replace Emma. I was ready because I had learned to love myself again. I had learned that I was enough. One afternoon, after a quiet day at the bookstore, Sarah and I sat outside on the porch, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden. There was a new sense of calm in the air, a stillness that seemed to breathe life into everything around us. "I'm glad you stayed," Sarah said softly, her eyes watching the sky. I turned to her, surprised by the sudden honesty in her voice. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, a small smile on her lips. "You could have left. A lot of people would have just kept running. But you didn't. You stayed, even when it was hard, even when you didn't know what was next." I thought about her words for a moment, and I realized she was right. I had stayed, and not just physically. I had stayed emotionally, too. I had allowed myself to feel, to heal, to let go of the things that had held me back for so long. "I'm glad I stayed, too," I said quietly, meaning it. I think I needed this more than I realized." Sarah looked at me then, her eyes soft but steady, and for a brief moment, there was an understanding between us. A quiet recognition that this, whatever this was, wasn't about fixing broken parts of ourselves, but about finding a new way forward. "I've learned something too," I continued, feeling the weight of the words. "That it's okay to let go. That sometimes, when you think everything is falling apart, it's actually falling into place." We sat in silence for a while, letting the truth of it sink in. The sky darkened, and the stars began to appear one by one, the night unfolding quietly around us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace with where I was. I had walked away from something that wasn't right, something that had kept me tethered to a past I could never change. But I had walked into something new, something that felt full of promise, and maybe even hope. There was no grand resolution, no sweeping moment of clarity. There didn't need to be. Life wasn't about the big, dramatic gestures. It was about small moments, moments of realization, of understanding, of learning to trust again, both in others and in yourself. And as I sat there with Sarah, the world around us quiet and still, I realized that everything I had gone through, every pain, every mistake, had led me here. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready for whatever came next. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't afraid. I was finally free. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something better than I could have ever imagined.